Picture the longest table in the county, set with silver that had not been polished in earnest for 2 years, because the family could no longer pay the man who used to do it. Picture a woman in a grey wool dress, standing at the foot of that table, below the salt, while a great lady in diamonds lifts a finger and calls her a thief before 40 guests. Picture the lid of a battered trunk thrown back, hands tearing through a poor woman's linen to find the jewel they swear she stole. Now hold that picture, because everything in it is about to turn over, and the woman they are shaming is the only reason a single candle in that house is still lit. Her name was not the name they had been given, and in 1 hour, every soul at that table would learn it. But that is the end of the week, and we begin at the start of it, on a grey afternoon in the spring of 1816, when a hired carriage rattled up the long drive of Ellesmere Court and let down a plain young woman with 1 trunk and no maid. Her real name was Cordelia Merrick, and she was, though no one looking at her would have guessed it, one of the richest women in England. Her late father had built a fortune out of shipping and banking, and the loans his house had made held the mortgages on half the great estates in the county. Ellesmere was one of them. The whole pile of it, the stone and the slate and the deer park and the failing farms, leaned on money that, by law and by ledger, belonged to her. She had been contracted to marry the Duke of Ellesmere. She had never met him. The agreement had been struck between her trustees and the Duke's lawyers, a tidy arrangement to save a noble house from ruin by feeding it a banking fortune through the marriage bed. Cordelia had read the contract herself. Her name sat on it beside the family seal, a line of ink that turned a living woman into a sum. She had been a sum her whole life, courted for the fortune, flattered for the fortune, never once for herself, so she had made a quiet decision that scandalized her trustees and would have horrified the Duke. She would arrive a week early, under a borrowed name, dressed as a nobody, and she would watch. She wanted to see how a family that needed her money treated a woman who had none. She wanted to know, before she signed her life away, whether there was a single person inside those grand walls worth marrying. So Cordelia Merrick became Cora Day, a companion engaged to read to the Dowager Duchess and make herself useful, and she walked up the steps of Ellesmere Court as the lowest creature in the house. Ellesmere Court rose out of its overgrown park like a thing built to be admired from a distance and never looked at too closely. From the end of the drive it was magnificent, all honey-coloured stone and tall windows and a great pillared front, the kind of house that announced a family had been important for a very long time. It was only as the carriage drew near that the cracks showed, the chipped urns, the weeds in the gravel, a whole wing with its shutters closed because the rooms behind them could no longer be heated. Cordelia, who had grown up in new money and knew exactly what old money cost to keep, read the whole story of the place in a single glance from the carriage window. Grand in the front, hollow behind. A house like a great many people she had known, spending its last on the face it showed the world. The butler looked at her trunk as though it had been left by a tradesman. The footmen kept their hands at their sides, and before she had been 5 minutes in the hall, a voice came down the great staircase like cold water poured from a height. So, this is the companion. The woman descending was perhaps 30, handsome in the way of a portrait that has been told too often how fine it is. She wore a morning gown that had cost more than the wages of every servant in the house combined, and at her throat a string of pearls she touched often, to be sure others saw it. This was Lady Maud Crail, the Duke's cousin, and she had ruled Ellesmere Court for years the way a regent rules a kingdom whose king is too tired to argue. "You are smaller than I expected," Lady Maud said, walking a slow circle around her. "And greyer. Well, my aunt wished for someone to read to her, and I suppose any voice will do. You will keep to the back stairs. You will not use the front rooms unless you are sent for. You will not speak unless spoken to. Do you understand the arrangement?" "Perfectly, my lady," Cordelia said. "She speaks." Lady Maud smiled at a younger woman who had drifted into the hall behind her, a thin creature in yellow who laughed before anything funny had been said. "Lady Pruitt, the companion, speaks." "How clever of it," said Lady Pruitt. Cordelia said nothing. She had decided, somewhere on the long road, that she would answer cruelty the way her father had answered a bad market, without heat and without haste, and that she would keep her own counsel until counsel was worth keeping. So she lowered her eyes, not because she felt low, but because lowered eyes told her tormentors nothing, and Cordelia had come to learn. She was shown to her room by a frightened undermaid who could not have been more than 16. It was a narrow chamber off the cold back stair, with a window that looked onto the kitchen yard and a bed that sloped toward the wall. The grate held no fire. The maid lit a single candle and lingered, twisting her apron. "They said to tell you supper's at the servants' board, miss, not the hall," the girl whispered. And Lady Maud said you wasn't to have coal. On account of companions, don't. Only family and proper guests." "What is your name?" Cordelia asked. "Tabitha, miss." "Thank you for the candle, Tabitha. It was kind of you to wait and tell me yourself instead of leaving me to find it out cold." The girl flushed as though she had been given a coin. No one, it seemed, had thanked her for anything in a long while. She bobbed and fled, and Cordelia sat on the sloping bed in her cloak and looked out at the kitchen yard and thought, without a trace of self-pity, that she had been right to come. A house showed its true face to the people it thought could do nothing for it. That first evening she ate at the servants' board below the kitchen, at the long scrub table where the household took its meals, and she learned a great deal in an hour. The upper servants ate first and best, the lower ate what was left, and the companion, it was made clear, ranked somewhere below the still-room maid and just above the boot boy. The housekeeper, a thin woman named Mrs. Pell, who took her orders and her temper alike from Lady Maud, set a bowl of thin broth in front of Cordelia, and a heel of yesterday's bread, and said, "Companions don't dine, they're fed," as though reciting a rule older than the house. The footman laughed. Cordelia ate the broth without complaint, and thanked Mrs. Pell, and watched. She watched who flinched when Lady Maud's name was spoken, and who puffed up to repeat it. She watched Tabitha get her knuckles rapped for spilling a drop. She watched a whole small kingdom run on fear, and she thought of her father, who had told her once that you could learn everything about a great man by the way his clerks behaved when he left the room. The same was true, she found, of a great house. She did not yet know that one person in the house had a different face entirely. She met him the next morning in the library, a stranger to her then. She had risen early and gone looking for something to read because the dowager would not be ready for company until noon, and a cold room is more bearable with a book in it. The library at Ellesmere was a long room of dark shelves and tall windows, and a fire had been lit there, the only fire she had found burning in the whole wing. A man stood at the window with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand, looking out at the park as though it owed him an explanation. He was perhaps in his early 30s, plainly dressed with a tired set to his shoulders, and a face that had decided some time ago to give nothing away. Cordelia took him for a steward or a land agent or some sober relation come to help untangle the family's affairs. She did not curtsy deeply, because companions did not curtsy to stewards, and she said, "Forgive me. I was told the family did not use this room before noon. I will take a book and go." He turned. He looked at her for a moment, at the grey dress and the steady eyes, and something in his face eased, as though he had expected another sort of person and was relieved to find this one. "Take two," he said. "No one reads them. They sit here looking expensive, which is the only work anyone in this house is asked to do." It was so dry and so unexpected that Cordelia nearly smiled. "You are the new companion," he said. "For my mother." "Cora Day," she said. "And you are—" "Tired," he said. "Mostly tired. Take your book before it changes its mind." She took two, as he had suggested, and at the door she paused. "The fire," she said. "Will it disturb you if I read by it for an hour? My room has no grate that anyone will light." A muscle moved in his jaw. He did not ask why a guest of the house had no fire. She saw him decide not to ask, and she saw him understand the answer anyway. "Sit by the fire as long as you like," he said. "If anyone objects, send them to me." She read by the fire for an hour. He stayed at the window and did not speak, and the silence between them was the first comfortable thing she had felt since she arrived. When she rose to go to the dowager, she thanked him, and he inclined his head, and only when she was halfway up the back stair did Tabitha, passing with an armful of linen, drop a curtsy so low she nearly fell over and whisper, "Was His Grace wanting anything in the library, miss?" "His Grace," Cordelia repeated. "The Duke, miss, Duke Adrian. That was him by the window, weren't it? I saw you come out." Cordelia stood very still on the cold stair with her two stolen books, and for the first time in a long while the careful machine of her plan slipped a gear. The man she had been contracted to marry, the man she had come to judge, had given her his fire and called her by her false name, and told her to send anyone who objected to him. And he had no idea that the grey companion he had been kind to was the heiress he had been sold to, the very contract he was said to dread. She might have ended it then. She might have sent for her trustee, signed her name, married a decent man and gone home. But she had come to learn the whole truth of the house, not half of it, and she had a week. So she said nothing. She would watch a little longer. That, as it turned out, was the most dangerous decision she made all week, because it gave Lady Maud Crail 6 more days to dig her own grave. The Dowager Duchess. Frances was a frail woman who kept to her rooms and to a shawl that had once been very fine. She had been pushed to the edges of her own house so gradually that she had stopped noticing the slope of it, the way Cordelia had stopped noticing the slope of her bed. But she had kind eyes, and on the second day, when Cordelia read to her without once raising her voice or treating her like a child, the old woman reached out and patted her hand. "You read beautifully, my dear," she said. "Where did you learn?" "My father," Cordelia said, which was true. He believed a woman should be able to read anything put in front of her, especially the things written to deceive her. The Dowager laughed, a thin sound that turned into a cough. "He sounds a sensible man." "Most are not. My son is, but he carries this house on his back like a sack of stones, and he will not put it down even to rest." She looked at the window. "We are not what we were, you know. The companion you replaced left because we could not pay her. I am not supposed to say such things. Maud says it is vulgar to speak of money." "Lady Maud says a great many things," Cordelia said carefully. "She does," said the Dowager, and her old eyes were not nearly as vague as Cordelia had thought. "Be careful of her, child. She has decided to marry my son and rule this house outright, and she does not care for any woman my son is civil to. I am told he was civil to you in the library this morning. Servants talk, child, and Maud's maid talks loudest of all." Cordelia had not realized the meeting had been remarked at all. She filed it away, the way her father had taught her to file away every fact that someone did not mean for her to have. Cordelia spent her free hours doing what she had truly come to do, which was to read the house the way she read a ledger. She walked the place with her companion's invisibility like a cloak, and no one minds a servant in a corridor, so she saw a great deal. She saw the good rooms kept up for show and the back rooms with the damp climbing the walls. She saw the long gallery where the portraits hung and the squares of brighter paper where 2 paintings had quietly been sold. She slipped out one afternoon to the home farm and fell into talk with a tenant's wife who did not know her from any other plain woman, and learned that the rents had been squeezed and the repairs left undone, that the roofs of the cottages leaked worse than the roof of the great house, and that the people on the land were frightened, not of the Duke, whom they spoke of with a rough fondness, but of the day the debts came due and a stranger turned them all out. "He is a good young master," the woman said, jogging a baby on her hip, "better than his father ever was. But a good master with empty pockets cannot mend a roof with kindness, can he?" Cordelia walked back across the fields in the falling light and did her sums, and the sums told her what the broth and the cold grate had only hinted, that Ellesmere was not a house of greedy people clutching a fortune, but a house of one decent man and one grasping woman fighting over a sinking ship, and that the money she carried in her name was the difference between this whole small world standing and falling. It changed nothing about the test she had set, but it told her what the prize was worth, and to whom. The cruelty, when it came in small, careful cuts, because Lady Maud was an artist of the small, careful cut. At the servants' table, where Cordelia took her meals, the food grew worse for her plate alone. A note appeared in Lady Maud's hand, instructing the cook that the companion was on a reducing regimen and was to have bread and broth. When the Dowager asked Cordelia to walk with her in the walled garden, Lady Maud arranged for the gate to be locked and the key mislaid for an afternoon, so that the old woman waited in the cold and blamed the companion for not bringing her cloak. When guests began to arrive for the betrothal party at the week's end, Cordelia was made to carry their boxes up the back stairs like a porter, and Lady Pruitt laughed and said loudly that it was wonderful how some people would do anything for their bread. One afternoon stood out from the rest because it was the day Cordelia first saw how far Lady Maud meant to go. The early guests had gathered in the long drawing-room for tea, and Cordelia had been sent in to fetch the Dowager's footstool. Lady Maud, seeing her, called out across the room in her sweetest voice that the company should not mind the companion. She was quite tame, and then, for the amusement of Lady Pruitt and 2 visiting misses, set her a task. "Recite something for us, Day. You read to my aunt, do you not? Let us hear this famous voice." It was meant to make a performing animal of her, a servant trotted out for sport. The room tittered and waited for the grey woman to stammer and flush. Cordelia set down the footstool. She folded her hands, and in a clear, unhurried voice she recited a passage on the vanity of riches, word perfect, from a sermon every well-bred person in that room had heard and none had listened to, and she chose the lines about the rich man who feasts while the beggar waits at his gate, and she looked, very mildly, at no one in particular as she said them. The tittering stopped. Lady Pruitt's smile curdled. Lady Maud's eyes narrowed because she had reached for a stick and been handed a mirror, and she did not like her reflection. "That will do," she said sharply. "You may go." Cordelia went, but she had made an enemy understand, for one cold moment, that the grey woman was not afraid of her, and an enemy who is not feared back is an enemy who will escalate. Through all of it, Cordelia kept her level calm, and the calm itself became a kind of insult to Lady Maud, who could not understand why the grey woman would not weep or cringe. She redoubled. She invented faults. She told the assembling guests in her honeyed voice that one must watch the lower sort of servant closely, for things had a way of going missing when their kind were in a great house, and she did all of it where the Duke could not see. That was the part Cordelia marked most of all. Lady Maud was careful, in front of Adrian, to be sweetness itself, and her cruelty crawled out only in the corners and the back passages where the master of the house never went. It told Cordelia 2 things. It told her that Lady Maud knew exactly what she was doing and knew it to be wrong. And it told her that the Duke's good opinion was the one currency in the house that Maud still feared to lose. Once, and only once that week, Lady Maud miscalculated and let her cruelty show where the Duke could see it. It was in the entrance hall, some days before the dinner. A carriage of guests had arrived and their boxes with them, and Lady Maud had stood at the foot of the stairs directing the companion to carry them up, one after another, the heavy ones first, in front of the new arrivals, smiling all the while. "Faster, Day. We have not got all day, and you have nothing else to do that signifies." Cordelia had taken up a heavy case without a word when the Duke came in from the stable-yard, still in his riding coat, and stopped at the sight of it. He looked at the grey woman bent under a trunk that should have gone up on a footman's shoulder. He looked at his cousin smiling beside the empty hands of 3 idle footmen, and something in his weary face went hard. "Put that down," he said to Cordelia quietly, and to the nearest footman. "You, and you. The boxes are your work, not hers." He turned to Lady Maud, and the whole hall heard him, the guests and the servants both. "My mother's companion is not a porter, Maud, and you are not the mistress of this house, whatever you may have grown used to telling yourself. See that you remember it." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Lady Maud's smile stayed fixed on her face like a thing nailed there, and she said, "Of course, cousin. I only meant to be useful." And the moment passed. But Cordelia had seen it, and she had filed it where she filed everything that mattered, and she had understood that the man defended a penniless nobody for nothing, with no notion she was anything else, because decency was simply the shape his soul had taken. It was, though he never knew it, the exact thing she had crossed 3 counties to find. The Duke, for his part, kept finding her. It was not contrived, or if it was contrived so gently that Cordelia could not be sure. He came to the library each morning, and she came for her book, and somehow the book took an hour to choose. He walked in the walled garden in the evening, where the old roses had run wild because the gardeners had been let go, and somehow she was sent to cut flowers for the dowager's room at the same hour. They talked. She had not meant to talk so much. In the library one grey morning they talked of books for the better part of an hour, the way people talk, who have each privately decided the other is the only sensible person in the building. She found he had actually read the volumes he had told her no one read, and that he hid a real and rather sad love of poetry behind his dry tongue, the way a man hides a soft thing in a hard coat. She told him her favourite passages, and watched him write the titles on the inside of his wrist with a pencil stub, like a schoolboy, so he would not forget them. He told her, almost shyly, that he had once meant to travel, to see Rome and the Greek islands, before the debts closed over his head like water, and he became a man who managed a falling house instead of a man who did anything at all. "And what would you have been," she asked, "if the house had not fallen on you?" He thought about it longer than the question seemed to deserve. "Useful," he said at last. "Not grand, just useful to someone, in a way that was mine to choose and not handed down with a title." It was the most naked thing he had said to her, and he seemed to regret it the instant it was out, and covered it at once with some dry remark about the weather. But she had heard it, and she thought, standing there in her grey dress with 2 borrowed books in her hands, that she had never in her life been courted by anyone who wanted nothing from her, and that it was a strange and weakening thing to be wanted, for once, only for the half-hour of one's company. "You do not flatter me," he said one evening, snapping a dead head off a rose with more violence than the rose deserved. "Do you know how strange that is? Everyone in this house flatters me. They flatter me because they want something, and the worst of it is they all want the same thing, which is money I do not have." "I want nothing from you, Your Grace," Cordelia said. "I find it makes conversation easier." "There it is again." He looked at her sidelong. "You talk to me like a person, not like a duke, not like a debt with a title on it. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" "You are a person," she said. "The title is a coat you are wearing, a heavy one by the look of you. I see no reason to talk to the coat." He laughed properly and seemed surprised at the sound. "I am to be married," he said abruptly, as though the words had been pressing on him. "Did they tell you? At the end of the week, to an heiress I have never met, a Miss Merrick, a fortune in a dress. The whole party is for her, the whole show. My family has sold me to a banking house to keep the rain off this roof, and I am expected to be grateful, and the devil of it is, I am grateful, because the tenants will starve if I am not." He looked at the wild roses. "I dread her, whoever she is. Some cold, proud, purchased thing who looks at me and sees the same as everyone else. A coat." Cordelia stood very still among the roses with her shears in her hand. She could have told him then. She nearly did. But she heard, under the bitterness, the exact shape of her own wound spoken back to her in a man's voice, the dread of being a price, the certainty that one could be wanted for money and never for oneself, and she understood that the Duke of Ellesmere and the companion Cora Day had each come to the same lonely place by opposite roads, and she found she could not bear to make herself, in his mind, the cold purchased thing he dreaded. Not yet, not while he still spoke to her like this. "Perhaps she dreads you too," Cordelia said. "Perhaps she has been a fortune in a dress her whole life and is sick to death of it. Perhaps she came early, in a grey dress, to see whether there was one person in this house worth marrying." He looked at her oddly. "What a strange thing to say." "I am a strange woman," she said. "You will be late for dinner, Your Grace." She did not sleep that night. She had come to set a test, and the man had passed it without knowing a test was being set, and that was the only kind of pass that counted. But she had also seen very clearly the trap she was building for herself. Every hour she stayed silent made the eventual telling worse, and every hour she stayed silent, Lady Maud grew bolder. On the 5th night, Cordelia learned exactly how bold. She had gone down the back stair after the house was abed to fetch warm milk for the dowager, who could not sleep for coughing. The passage outside the still room was dark, and the door to the housekeeper's little office stood ajar with a light behind it, and 2 voices came through the gap, low and certain, and Cordelia stopped where she was and did not breathe. "Must be done before the betrothal dinner, not after," Lady Maud was saying. "Once the Merrick woman is here and the thing is signed, my hands are tied. He will have his fortune and no further use for my advice, and that grey nothing my aunt dotes on will be kept on out of pity, and I will not have it. I will not be a guest in a house I have run for 6 years." "What would you have me do, my lady?" That was Lady Pruitt, breathless and eager. "The companion." A rustle of silk. "She has made my cousin soft. He defends her. He gives her fires and books and his arm in the garden. Do not think I have not seen. A man does not do that for a servant unless the servant has worked some low trick on him. I want her gone before the heiress comes, and I want her gone in a way that no one, not my aunt, not Adrian, will ever take her back. But how, my lady? She does nothing wrong. She's maddening. She just endures. Then we will give her something to be guilty of." Lady Maud's voice was perfectly calm, and that calm was the most frightening thing Cordelia had ever heard. "The Merrick betrothal gift is to be the sapphire, the old family piece. It sits in the blue case in the morning room until the dinner. On the night of the dinner, before the company, I will find it missing, and it will be found, where do you suppose, Pruitt? In the companion's trunk. A thief, caught before 40 guests. My aunt cannot pet a thief. Adrian cannot defend a thief. She will be turned out of the door into the dark with the whole county to watch. And that, my dear, is the end of Miss Cora Day." Lady Pruitt gave a soft, delighted gasp. "And who will put the sapphire in her trunk? I will see to it myself. The girl Tabitha cleans that room. I will have her carry the case up, and if anyone asks, it was the little undermaid in and out of the companion's room all day, and who is to say which low creature took it? We may lose the maid too. No matter. There are always more maids." Cordelia stood in the dark passage and felt something in her go very cold and very clear, the way the air goes before a storm. She had come to learn the truth of the house, and now she had it, all of it, down to the bottom. She knew what Lady Maud meant to do. She knew the night it would happen. She knew the girl who would be blamed beside her. And she knew, with a calm that would have frightened Lady Maud far more than tears, exactly what she was going to do about it. She did not confront them, or wake the Duke. She went back up the stairs with the warm milk, and she sat with the dowager until the old woman slept. And then she sat alone in her cold room, and she wrote 2 letters. The first was to her solicitor and chief trustee, Mr. Hollis Garrow, a dry, exacting man who had managed her father's affairs and now managed hers, and who had thoroughly disapproved of this entire masquerade. She wrote it plainly. She told him the day of the betrothal dinner. She told him to come in person and to bring with him the sealed letter of authority that named Cora Day as Lady Cordelia Merrick, and to bring as well the whole bundle of the Ellesmere mortgages, every deed and note the Merrick house held over the estate. She told him to arrive not before the dinner, but during it, and to ask at the door for the master of the house, and to wait until he was sent for. She underlined nothing. She did not need to. Garrow would understand. The second letter she did not send. It was to the Duke, and it began, "I have not told you the truth," and she got no further than the second line before she set down the pen, because she found she did not want him to read who she was. She wanted him to see it. There is a difference, and Cordelia, who had been read about and reported on and described in contracts her whole life, knew the difference better than anyone alive. In the morning, she found Tabitha in the scullery and drew her aside. "Tabitha," she said quietly, "I'm going to ask something of you, and you must trust me, though I cannot yet tell you all of why. In the next day or 2, you may be asked to carry a case, a jewel case, up to my room, or to clean my room while it is there. If you are, I want you to do exactly as you are told. Do not refuse, but mark the hour, and mark who tells you, and mark whether anyone goes into my room after you. Can you remember all that and tell no one?" The girl's eyes were wide. "Are you in trouble, miss?" "No," said Cordelia, and it was the truest thing she had said all week. "I'm about to be in a very great deal of safety, but it must look like trouble first. Will you watch for me, and tell the truth if you are ever asked, even before grand people, even if you are frightened?" "I'd tell the truth for you, miss," Tabitha said. "You're the only one in this house ever thanked me for a candle." That night Cordelia sat late with the dowager again, reading until the old woman's breathing slowed, and when she rose to go, the dowager caught her wrist with surprising strength. "You are not what you seem, child," the old woman said, her eyes bright and clear in the candlelight. "I have watched a great many people come through this house, and they all want something, and I can always see the wanting on them. I cannot see it on you. It is restful." She patted Cordelia's hand. "Whatever it is you are about, I hope it ends well for you. You have been kinder to a useless old woman than my own blood has been in years." Cordelia stood in the doorway with the candle, and felt the careful armour of her plan press against something soft beneath it. "It will end well, your grace," she said. "For you, I think it will end very well indeed." and she went up to her cold room and slept, for the first time all week, without dreaming of ledgers. The next day the guests arrived in earnest, and Ellesmere Court put on its threadbare best. The good silver came out, dull as it was. The last of the cellar was carried up. The great dining hall, which had not seen a full table in years, was opened and aired and hung with candles, and the gentry of the county rolled up the drive in their carriages to drink the Duke's wine, and gawk at the heiress who was to save him, an heiress who, they had been told, would arrive the following day. She was already there. She was in grey, carrying boxes up the back stair, and not one of them looked at her twice. And in the morning room, in its blue case, sat the family sapphire, waiting to be stolen. The night before the dinner, she met the Duke once more in the walled garden, perhaps for the last time as the woman he thought she was, and they both seemed to feel it, though only one of them knew why. The roses were closed against the cold. He had brought no shears tonight and made no pretence of pruning. "They tell me the heiress comes tomorrow," he said. "The whole machinery of it begins. The contract, the dinner, the rest of my life." He was quiet a moment. "I keep thinking I should be glad. The house saved, the tenants safe, and instead I find I have spent a week wishing the heiress would lose her way on the road and never arrive, so that I might go on talking to a companion in a grey dress who has no fortune and no rank, and not the smallest reason to flatter me." He looked at her, and there was something raw under the dryness now. "That is a wicked thing to wish, and I wish it, and I do not even know what I would do if it came true. A duke cannot marry his mother's companion. The roof would fall in within the year." Cordelia's heart was going very hard. "And if he could," she said, very low, "if by some impossible turn the companion and the fortune were the same woman, what then?" He laughed, short and pained, as at a child's fairy tale. "Then I should be the luckiest man in England, and I should not believe my luck for a moment, and I should spend my life trying to deserve it." He shook his head. "But that is not how the world is built, is it? The world hands you the money or the person, and calls you greedy if you ask for both." "Sometimes," said Cordelia, "the world surprises you." She left him in the dark garden before her voice could betray her, and she went up to her cold room and lay awake, not from fear of the morning, but from something far more dangerous, which was hope. On the afternoon of the dinner, exactly as Cordelia had foreseen, the trap was laid. Tabitha was sent up with the blue case and told to leave it on the bed and go, and a little after, Lady Maud climbed the back stair herself, slipped into the companion's room, took the great sapphire from the case, and pressed it down among the linen at the very bottom of the battered trunk, smiling at how neatly it would be found. What Lady Maud did not know was that the room had a second visitor before the dressing bell. When the house was busy at its mirrors, Cordelia went quietly up, opened her own trunk and lifted the sapphire out of it. She turned the stone once in the grey light, this thing that was meant to hang her, and then she tucked it away beneath her mattress, where it would keep until the moment came to produce it. And in its place at the very bottom of the trunk where Lady Maud's hand would surely go, she laid her mother's seal ring, the heavy old gold ring with the Merrick crest cut deep into the dark stone, the one thing she had carried with her under every borrowed name. Let them search, she thought. Let them empty the whole trunk before the whole county. They would find no stolen sapphire. They would find the seal of the house that owned them. Then she went down to take her place against the wall in grey, and she waited. The betrothal dinner was held in the great dining hall on the 8th night, and the table ran the length of the room under 100 candles. Cordelia was not invited to sit at it, of course. She was permitted, as the dowager's companion, to stand against the wall behind the old woman's chair in case she was needed, below the salt, below everyone, a grey shape at the edge of the gold. From there she could see the whole length of the table. She could see Lady Maud seated at the Duke's right hand as though she were already mistress of the house, in diamonds tonight and not mere pearls. She could see Lady Pruitt beside her, glittering and watchful. She could see the Duke at the head, in dark formal clothes, looking down the table at his county and his debts with the weary courtesy of a man performing his own funeral. And she could see, when she let herself, the empty chair near the head that had been set, with great ceremony, for the heiress who was to arrive tomorrow. Miss Merrick's chair, her own chair, waiting for a woman who was standing against the wall in grey. The dinner was a long performance of plenty over poverty. Dishes that had cost the household its last ready money were carried in and set down, glazed carrots and buttered asparagus and warm rolls and a great glistening saddle of mutton, and the guests ate as though they did not know, as they all knew, that the house could not afford a tenth of it. Lady Maud presided over the abundance like a queen, laughing too brightly, touching the Duke's sleeve, naming for the table all the improvements that would be made when dear Adrian is settled. It was over the second course that she sprang it. She set down her glass. She looked with a small frown toward the far end of the room, where the blue jewel case had been brought in and set upon the sideboard, ready for the betrothal gift to be presented later in the evening. Then she rose, slowly, a tall woman in diamonds, and the table quieted around her the way a room quiets when someone important means to speak. "Forgive me," she said sweetly. "I do not wish to spoil the evening, but I must ask Adrian's leave to attend to a small, ugly matter before it grows large." She turned to the Duke. "The sapphire, cousin. The betrothal sapphire. I went to look on it not an hour ago to be sure it was fit to present, and the case was empty. The stone is gone." A murmur went down the table. The Duke set down his fork. "Gone," he repeated. "Maud, that is not possible. The case has been watched all day." "It has been in the morning room all day," Lady Maud said, "and there has been one person in and out of that morning room all day, cousin, carrying boxes, fetching and bringing, a person we none of us truly know." Her eyes lifted, slow and deliberate, and came to rest on the grey woman against the wall. "Your mother's companion, the creature called Coraday." Every head at the table turned. Cordelia stood quite still under the weight of 40 stares and felt, distantly, almost grateful. The thing was out at last, in the light, where she had always meant for it to be. "That is a grave thing to say of anyone, Maud," the Duke said, and his voice had gone very quiet and very cold. "Have a care." "I say it because I care for this family," Lady Maud said, all wounded sweetness. "I have watched her wind her way into your good graces all week. I have held my tongue. But I will not hold it while she walks off with a stone worth more than this house. There is one way to settle it, cousin, one fair way, and let her be cleared by it if she can. Send for her trunk, have it brought down and opened here, before everyone, and let us all see that there is nothing in it but a poor woman's rags. If I am wrong, I will beg her pardon on my knees before the whole county." It was beautifully done. To refuse the search was to seem to shield a thief. The Duke's jaw tightened. He looked at Cordelia, and there was no doubt in his face, only a kind of helpless fury at the trap, and he opened his mouth to forbid the whole thing. Cordelia spoke first. "Send for it," she said. Her voice was level and it carried, and the table stilled at the sound of it, because below the salt companions did not speak so, in a hall full of their betters. She stepped away from the wall into the candlelight, and she did not look afraid, and the wrongness of that, a servant unafraid, sent a small, uneasy ripple down the room. "By all means, my lady, send for my trunk," Cordelia said, and she looked Lady Maud full in the face. "Have it opened here, before every guest, before the Duke, before the Dowager. I should like that very much. I have sat at finer tables than this, and meaner ones, my lady. A chair below the salt tells me nothing about myself, only a great deal about my hostess. Let us see what the trunk tells the room. You will not speak to her so," the Duke began, rising, his chair scraping the floor. "She is a guest under my roof, Maud, and you will not speak to her so while I am standing in the room." "Let her have her search, your grace," Cordelia said gently, and something in the way she said it, the calm of a woman who has already counted every card, made the Duke pause and stare at her. "I should not like to be thought of as anything I am not. Send for the trunk." So the trunk was sent for. 2 footmen carried the battered grey trunk down and set it in the open space at the foot of the table, and the whole shining company leaned forward to watch a poor woman shamed. Lady Maud stood over it with her chin high and her diamonds throwing little knives of light. Tabitha had been dragged in too, white-faced, made to stand by the door as the other suspect, the low maid who had been in and out, and Cordelia caught her eye across the room and gave her, very slightly, a nod. "Steady. Steady now." The hall had gone very quiet, and the only sound was the rustle of silk as people leaned to see. This was the thing the county had come for, though they had not known it, the sight of a nobody brought low, and there is an ugly hunger in even the politest gathering for exactly that. Cordelia felt the hunger in the room like heat off a stove. She did not flinch from it. She had been the object of every kind of look a person can receive. The appraising look of suitors pricing her gown, the calculating look of mothers counting her father's ships. And this look, the look that wanted to watch her shamed, was only one more, and it would be the last of its kind she ever suffered. She stood straight in her grey dress beside her battered trunk and let them look. "Open it," said Lady Maud. A footman knelt and threw back the lid. Lady Maud did not wait for him. She bent and plunged her own ringed hands into the trunk, fast, practised, knowing exactly where she had hidden what she meant to find, throwing out the grey woman's poor linen onto the floor of the great hall for everyone to see. A darned shift, a worn shawl, a pair of mended gloves, the small shabby life of a nobody scattered across the boards. The guests murmured, and then Lady Maud's hand closed on something at the bottom, and she straightened with a cry of triumph, and held it up to the candlelight for the whole room to see. It was not the sapphire. It was a ring, a heavy old gold seal ring, a woman's ring with a crest cut deep into the dark stone, and it caught the candlelight and threw it back, and for a long, strange moment Lady Maud stood holding it up before 40 guests, without understanding what she held, only knowing that it was not the stone she had hidden, that her hand had found the wrong thing, that the trunk had betrayed her. "That is not the sapphire," someone said into the silence. "What is that?" said another. And then an old voice, thin but suddenly clear, spoke from beside the Duke. The Dowager Duchess Frances had risen from her chair, one trembling hand on the table, and she was staring at the ring in Lady Maud's fingers with the look of a woman seeing a ghost. "I know that seal," the Dowager said. "I have seen it on a contract, on the marriage contract." She turned her old eyes on the grey woman standing calm in the candlelight. "That is the Merrick seal." The hall went utterly still. Cordelia Merrick stepped forward and took the ring gently out of Lady Maud's nerveless fingers, and she slid it onto her own hand where it had always belonged, her mother's ring, the seal of her house, and when she lifted her face she was no longer Cora Day at all. The grey dress was the same, and the woman inside it was entirely changed, and every soul at that table felt the change pass over them like cold air. "You are quite right, Your Grace," she said to the Dowager, and her voice filled the hall. "It is the Merrick seal. It is mine. It was my mother's before me." She turned to Lady Maud, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not have to. "That seal was never stolen, my lady. It is hers. It is mine. For a week you have starved me, locked me from the garden, set me to carry boxes, and tonight you have called me a thief before your guests, and emptied my trunk onto the floor to ruin me. And all that week you have been abusing Lady Cordelia Merrick, the woman who holds the mortgage on every stone you are standing on." A sound went through the room, not a gasp so much as a great indrawn breath, 40 people understanding the same thing at the same instant. At the head of the table the Duke of Ellesmere had gone perfectly white and perfectly still, staring at the woman in grey as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. "Cora," he said. Just that. The false name, helpless on his lips. "Cordelia," she said, and met his eyes, and for one moment in that crowded hall there was no one else in it. "My name is Cordelia. I'm sorry I could not tell you. I had a thing I needed to learn first, and you, Your Grace, you, above everyone in this house, you helped me learn it, without ever knowing you were teaching." It was into that ringing silence that the doors of the hall opened, and a footman, very flustered, announced that a gentleman had arrived asking for the master of the house and would not be put off, a Mr. Hollis Garrow, with papers. "Send him in," said Cordelia. Hollis Garrow came down the length of the great hall in his travelling coat, a dry, exacting man with a leather case under his arm, and he took in the scene, the scattered linen, the white faces, the ring on his client's hand, with a single sweeping glance, and his thin mouth tightened in something that on another man might have been satisfaction. "Lady Cordelia," he said, and bowed to her deeply, the bow a man gives to the head of a great house, and the bow itself was a thunderclap in that room, because everyone saw it, everyone understood that this sober man of law was bowing to the grey companion they had let carry their boxes. "I came, as you instructed. I have the letter of authority naming you, and I have brought the other documents you asked for." He set the case upon the table among the dishes. The Ellesmere mortgages. Every note and deed your father's house holds against this estate. All of it, as you wished, in one bundle. "Thank you, Mr. Garrow," said Cordelia. She turned then to the table, to the staring county, to the Duke, and last of all to Lady Maud, who stood among the spilled linen with her diamonds and her ruin. "Let me make the matter plain," Cordelia said, "so that no one carries the wrong story home tonight. I am Cordelia Merrick. I was contracted to marry the Duke of Ellesmere to save this house from the debts my family holds over it. I chose to come early and quietly, under a plain name, because I have been bought and bargained for my whole life, and I wished, just once, to see how I would be treated by people who believed I was worth nothing to them." She paused. "I have my answer. Some of you have given it to me very thoroughly." No one moved. "The sapphire is not stolen," Cordelia went on. "It was never stolen. My Lady Maud hid it in my trunk herself, this very afternoon, with her own hand, meaning to find it there before you all and have me thrown into the dark as a thief, and to let the blame fall, if it had to fall further, on a 16-year-old undermaid who has more honesty in her than this entire table. I found her gift where she had left it. I took it out, and I put it safe beneath my mattress, and in its place I laid my mother's ring, so that her search to shame me would shame only herself." She nodded toward the door. "Tabitha, tell them what you saw. You will not be punished for it. You have my word, and as of tonight, my word is the only word in this house that matters." The girl came forward shaking, but she lifted her chin and she spoke, and her plain, frightened voice was somehow grander in that hall than all of Lady Maud's silk. "Lady Maud had me carry the blue case up to the companion's room this afternoon, my lady. Her ladyship told me to leave it on the bed and go, and I went, but I forgot my cloth and turned back, and through the door I saw her ladyship take the stone out of the case and push it down into the bottom of the trunk, under the linen. I didn't understand it, my lady. I do now." "That is a lie," said Lady Maud, but her voice had cracked down the middle, and Lady Pruitt beside her had begun very quietly to edge her chair away. "It is not a lie," said the Duke. He had found his voice at last. He came down the length of his own table past his staring guests, and he did not look at Lady Maud at all. He stopped in front of Cordelia, and the whole hall watched the Duke of Ellesmere look at the woman he had given his fire to. "Send a footman to the companion's room," he said, without turning his head. "Look beneath the mattress, where she says she left it." A footman went, fast. The Duke kept his eyes on Cordelia. "I do not need to wait for the sapphire to be found to know the truth of it. I have eaten at this table beside my cousin for 6 years, and never once seen her speak as plainly as that frightened child just spoke. I know which of them is lying." The footman came back within minutes, breathless, holding the great blue sapphire up for all to see, and a long, low sound went round the room, and Lady Maud Crail put her ringed hand to her diamonds at her throat and seemed, for the first time in 6 years, to have nothing whatever to say. "Maud," the Duke said, and now he did turn to her, and his weary courtesy was entirely gone. "You will go upstairs. You will pack what is honestly yours, and nothing that is not. You will be gone from Ellesmere by morning, and you will not come back. Not for Christmas, not for my mother's funeral, not for mine. You have insulted, starved, and tried to ruin a guest under my roof. You have used a child to do it. There is no corner of what you have done tonight that I can forgive." "You cannot turn me out," Lady Maud said, but it came out thin. "I have run this house for 6 years. I have nowhere—" "You have run it into the ground," said the Duke. "It was Cordelia who finished it, and she finished it quietly, which was somehow worse. He turns you out of the house, my lady," she said. "I will tell you what I do. You came into this hall in diamonds to call a poor woman a thief and put her into the night with nothing. So, call for your trunk, cousin." She let the word sit, cousin, the word Maud had used all week as a weapon, turned now and handed gently back. "You have until morning, before I call in mine." She rested one hand on the leather case of mortgages. She did not need to explain. Everyone in that hall understood that the whole of Lady Maud's world, her settlement, her allowance, the very roof she imagined was hers to defend, sat inside that case, and that the woman she had spent a week tormenting now held it in the palm of her hand. Lady Maud Crail turned and walked out of the great hall of Ellesmere Court, and Lady Pruitt, after one frantic glance around a table where no one would meet her eyes, gathered her yellow skirts and hurried after her, and the two of them were gone, and the doors closed, and they were never, in any way that mattered, seen in that county again. What happened next would have been comic if it had not been so telling. The same county faces that had watched her carry boxes and said nothing, that had leaned forward so eagerly to see her trunk emptied, now discovered all at once a deep and tender regard for Lady Cordelia Merrick. A stout gentleman who had earlier complained that the broth was cold declared loudly that he had known from the first there was breeding in that face. A dowager who had not troubled to learn the companion's name now recalled, to anyone who would listen, that she had remarked only that morning on the young woman's uncommon dignity. Lady Pruitt's own mother began, very quietly, to explain to her neighbour that she had never truly approved of dear Maud. Cordelia watched the whole weather vane of the room swing about to point at her new fortune, and she felt neither flattered nor angry, only a great cool clarity, because there is no better lesson in the worth of a crowd's good opinion than to be despised by it on Tuesday, and adored by it on Wednesday, for no reason but the size of one's purse. She marked the faces. She would remember which of them had been kind when there was nothing to be gained, which was a very short list, and which had only found their manners when the seal came out, which was nearly all of them. For a moment no one spoke. 40 guests sat among the candles and the ruin of the dinner, and did not know where to look. And then the Duke of Ellesmere did a thing that none of them had expected, and that several of them would describe for years afterward as the moment the night truly turned. He did not go back to his seat at the head of the table. He went down on one knee on the boards of his own dining hall, among the scattered linen from a poor woman's trunk, in front of his whole county, and he took Cordelia Merrick's hand, the one that wore her mother's seal. "I have something to say," he said, loudly enough for the farthest guest to hear, "and I find I would rather say it in front of everyone than whisper it later and have it doubted. A week ago I told a companion in a grey dress that I dreaded the heiress I was contracted to marry. I called her a fortune in a dress, a cold-purchased thing. I said I would never be wanted for myself, and neither would she, and that love and obligation could not be the same thing." He drew a breath. "I was wrong on every count, and I have spent this week falling in love with the proof of it, and I did not even know her name." "Your Grace," Cordelia began, "let me finish, or I shall lose my nerve." There was the dry humour again, even on his knee, even now, and it made her throat tighten. "I courted a penniless companion, and I meant every word of it. I gave her my fire because she was cold and not because she was rich, for I did not know that she was rich. So no one in this room, and no one in this county, and no lawyer in that case, may ever tell me that I married her for her money. I will marry her as Cordelia, by my own choice, not as a contract anyone sold me." He looked up at her. "If she will have a tired man with a leaking roof, who has nothing to offer her that she does not already own." The hall held its breath. Cordelia Merrick looked down at the Duke of Ellesmere kneeling among the candle shadows, and the careful machine of her, the woman who had been a sum on a page her whole life, who had answered a week of cruelty without one tear, found that her eyes had filled at last, now, when it was safe, now, when no one could mistake the cause. "Stand up," she said softly. "Dukes do not kneel to their own companions. It confuses the staff." He stood. The county, uncertain, began to smile. "You asked me once whether I dreaded you," she said, only to him now, though the whole room strained to hear. "I told you perhaps she dreads you too. Perhaps she came in a grey dress to find one person worth marrying. I did come for that, and I found him on the first morning, by the library window, telling a stranger to take 2 books because no one read them." She turned her hand in his, so that the seal caught the light. "You called yourself a coat with a debt sewn into it. You were the only person in this house who looked at the grey woman and saw a person and not a use. That is the whole of what I came to learn, and you taught it to me without trying, which is the only way it ever counts." "Then have me," he said, "on your terms. Choose me back, Cora." He caught himself and smiled. "Cordelia, choose me back. I already chose you as no one." "I choose you," said Cordelia Merrick, "as no one and as myself, which I have not been allowed to be at the same time until tonight, and the great hall of Ellesmere Court, which an hour before had watched a woman branded a thief, rose to its feet and forgot itself entirely, and applauded, the whole gilded county on its feet for the companion in grey, and the Dowager Duchess Frances wept into her old fine shawl and laughed at the same time, and a 16-year-old undermaid stood by the door and cried, because the lady who had thanked her for a candle was going to be a duchess, and had promised and kept promises. When the guests had gone, in a babble of carriages and gossip that would feed the county for a year, the Dowager Duchess Frances crossed the emptying hall on her son's arm and stopped before the woman she had known only as her companion. For a moment, the old woman simply looked at her, and Cordelia braced for the distance that rank usually put between them. It did not come. The dowager reached up and took Cordelia's face in both her thin hands. "I told you," she said, her eyes wet, "that you were not what you seemed. I'm only glad you are something better and not something worse. You read to me when no one in this house could be troubled to, and you never once spoke to me as though I were furniture." She kissed her on the cheek. "Be my daughter, then, and not my companion. I find I should like that very much." And Cordelia, who had been welcomed into great houses all her life as a fortune, and never once as a person, found she had no clever answer ready, and only held the old woman's hands and said, "I should like it too." There remained the matter of the house, and Cordelia settled it the way she settled everything, plainly and without cruelty, in the cold light of the morning after. She sat with Hollis Garrow and the Duke at the long table where she had once stood against the wall, and she opened the leather case, and she went through the Ellesmere mortgages one by one with the eye her father had trained, the eye that read people and ledgers alike. She could have crushed the estate. She held every note. She could have called them all in and turned the whole proud county family into the road, the way Lady Maud had meant to turn her, and a smaller soul, a soul that had been a price too long, might have taken that revenge and called it justice. She did not. She had not come to ruin a house. She had come to find out whether it deserved to stand. "The tenants did not starve you, and the tenants did not insult me," she told the Duke. "The farms are sound. They have only been starved of the money to work them, while it was spent on diamonds and dinners to keep up a face. So, we forgive the worst of the debt outright, the part that was your father's folly and not yours. The rest we restructure gently over years, at a rate that lets the land breathe. The roof gets mended before the ballroom. The gardeners come back before the silver is polished. We do not save the house by crushing the people who live under it. That is not how my father built a fortune, and it is not how I mean to keep one." Garrow, who had expected a reckoning, wrote it all down with his dry mouth pressed into what was, for him, open admiration. The Duke watched her work, this woman who could read a mortgage the way his cousin had read a guest list, and Cordelia caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. "You are looking at me strangely again, Your Grace." "I am looking at you," he said, "like a man who has just understood that he is the luckiest fool in England, and is wondering how to deserve it." "You can begin," said Cordelia, "by sending Cole to the back-stair room. The companion who lodges there has been cold all week, and I have grown fond of her." Word of the night ran through the servants' hall before the last carriage had cleared the gates, and by morning the whole household had rearranged itself around a new son. Mrs. Pell, who had served the companion thin broth and called it feeding, appeared at the breakfast-room twisting her hands and began a long, anxious speech about misunderstandings, which Cordelia cut short. "You took your orders from Lady Maud, and your fear from the same place," she said. "I am not Lady Maud. Do your work honestly and kindly, and you will have nothing to fear from me. Do it cruelly, and you will find I have a very long memory." Mrs. Pell, who had expected dismissal, went away pale and thoughtful, and was, by all accounts, a changed housekeeper ever after. As for Tabitha, Cordelia sent for her that same morning. The girl came trembling, certain she had done wrong by speaking out before her betters. Cordelia took both her hands. "You told the truth in a room full of people who frightened you," she said, when grown men and grand ladies sat silent. "That is the rarest courage there is, and I do not mean to let it go to waste in a scullery. You will learn your letters and your figures properly with a tutor, and in time you will run a household of your own, and you will run it kindly, because you will remember exactly how it feels to be the smallest person in the room." Tabitha cried, and could not speak, and Cordelia, who understood being unable to speak, simply let her. Time passed, the way it does, and we may step over the rest of it to the following spring, to a morning when the roses in the walled garden had been pruned by gardeners who were paid again, and the slates on the roof no longer let in the rain, and the long table in the great hall of Ellesmere Court was set for a quiet family breakfast rather than a county's worth of show. At the head of that table, in the chair that had once been set with such ceremony for an heiress who never came, because she was already there in grey carrying the boxes, sat Cordelia, Duchess of Ellesmere, married not by contract but by choice, in the same hall where she had once been called a thief. On her hand, in plain sight where anyone might see it, where the whole table could see it, was her mother's seal ring, the heavy old gold ring that had been called stolen and very nearly thrown into the dark with her. It sat openly now at the head of the very table that had once turned her away. Across from her the Duke read his letters and pretended not to watch his wife, and failed at it, and did not much mind failing. Beside the fire the Dowager Duchess Frances, restored to colour and to consequence, and to a son who had time for her again, was teaching herself to laugh once more after years of holding her tongue, and carrying in the morning chocolate, in the neat dress of a proper upper servant being trained for better things, with her letters and her sums improving under a tutor the Duchess had hired, was a girl named Tabitha, who had once been thanked for a candle, and had spoken the truth in a hall full of grand people because of it, and who would, the Duchess had promised, run a household of her own one day, having learned in this one exactly what a household should not be. Of Lady Maud Crail and her shadow Lady Pruitt little needs to be said, which was the most fitting punishment of all for two women who had lived for being talked about. They had gone abroad, where the news of the county did not follow, and the diamonds had to be sold one by one, and the great houses there closed their doors to a woman who had been turned out of her own family's table for branding an heiress a thief. Cordelia had not crushed them. She had simply withdrawn her hand, and let the world do to them what they had meant to do to a nobody, which is to say, it had forgotten them. The Duchess of Ellesmere set down her cup and looked the length of the table that had once seated her below the salt, and the seal sat on her hand in plain sight now, at the head of the very table that had once turned her away. And if you take only one thing from this whole strange week at Ellesmere, take this. Lady Maud wore diamonds to that dinner, and pearls all the week before, and a name as old as the county, and a certainty that breeding and wealth and a great title made her worth more than the grey woman against the wall. She was wrong, and she lost everything to a woman in darned linen, because a string of pearls tells you what a person can afford, and the way they treat someone who can do nothing for them tells you what a person is. Lady Maud had everything that can be bought, and nothing that cannot. Cordelia Merrick walked into that house worth a fortune, and let them believe she was worth nothing, and in a week of cold rooms and cruel words, she learned the only thing worth knowing about every soul in it. Rank is a coat, money is a tool, but character is the one thing no one can hand you and no one can take, and in the end, it is the only inheritance that decides who is truly rich. The proud wear their diamonds for an evening, the good are wanted for a lifetime, and the woman they called a thief sat down at last at the head of the table, not because of the fortune she held, but because she was at long last chosen.